But first, let's go to Dallas. It was a Red River classic.
Gabriel has the football, looks to throw. He's under pressure. He lobs end zone. Touchdown! Nick Anderson! Touchdown! Oh, mama! Dillon Gabriel, a legacy-making drive!
Oh man, and having done that game before and been in that building and felt that energy before, I can only imagine what that was like in that moment, in that game. What an incredible performance by Oklahoma, yes, but also just Dillon Gabriel. Dillon Gabriel was a man amongst men. And our man amongst boys, in a lot of regard. He was the difference for Oklahoma. Dillon Gabriel and Toby Rowland, you were exactly right. I mean, a legacy-making drive, a legacy-making win. This is a guy that transferred to OU in large part because of this game, because of this stage. He wanted to get to this level, remember, after being at UCF with Jeff Lebby, by the way, his offensive coordinator, and he wanted to get to this level, and he wanted to get to this place, specifically OU, for this game, and he didn't get a chance to play in it last year. And so now, all of a sudden, here we go. He gets his chance against a team that a lot of us thought was easily a top 3 team, and by the way, still is a really good team. And he played like that. It was incredible. Incredible stuff from Dillon Gabriel. He gets the ball, 3 points. They've got to have it. He's down 3, minute 17 left, and drives 75 yards in 5 plays. He was sensational. And in a lot of ways, he's the reason that they win the game. But he's not the only reason, because this team coming into this season, and let's face it, if you've listened to this program for any amount of time, you'll know that in the offseason, I was saying that watch out for Oklahoma, and cautiously optimistic about what they could be. And the reason is because I knew that if they could improve on defense, if they could get Gabriel healthy for the majority of the year or in every game, then there was going to be a good chance that they were going to turn those close losses from a year ago into wins. And if you look up, those close losses that they had a year ago, if they turn those into wins, they're a 10-win team last year. So it was a small margin. So even though the defensive numbers last year were wild, in particular for OU, and more so for a Venables defense, I should say more so for a Venables defense, because we've seen some bad defenses at OU under Lincoln Riley. But in particular for a Venables defense, over 30 points per game, over 400 yards per game. It's like, wow, wasn't expecting that. I didn't know the jump that they could possibly take in 1 year. And I was wrong about what this defense could be. Now, the thing about it is, I still don't think that they're at their potential, either for this group or what they can be in the future. Let me explain what I'm talking about here. So when I did their game against Cincinnati, I knew that they were going to be better. I just didn't know how much better. They had totally revamped their defensive front 7. In fact, they got 6 guys to transfer in on their defensive line. Now, even Coach himself told me, Coach Venables, in our meeting, he said, listen, we probably didn't get the guys that we targeted right away, but we definitely got better. And then he used the term that he kept referring back to, and I'm sure if you're an OU fan, you've heard time and time again, we got better in terms of competitive depth. We feel like we can rotate, that guys aren't going to have to play 90 snaps. So he thought they would be fresher and have a better ability to attack in the front because of that competitive depth. And that showed up, by the way. 5 sacks, 10 tackles for loss, causing turnovers. Like that competitive depth and aggressiveness showed up. Now, if you're looking at what a Venables defense is, okay, like how is it constructed? Well, the first thing that they have to have is a very aggressive and athletic defensive line. That's what he likes to have. That's what the best defenses at Clemson had. When you think about those great defenses, that's what they had. Aggressive and athletic up front, real playmakers up front. And then they also have what I would consider to be like hybrid style players at the second level, in particular in the interior, the linebackers and more specifically the cheetah position, which is where Deshaun McCullough plays. That's where Isaiah Simmons played at Clemson. And McCullough has solidified that hybrid role for the Oklahoma defense. And then he likes to have length on the outside in terms of coverage. So when I looked at this defense, I'm like, okay, how does Venables want to build this? I still saw room and see room for potential down the road. I think that they can still get better on the defensive line. I still think that they can get better on the outside in terms of what they are coverage-wise. I think their best asset is at the linebacker and cheetah position. They've got the hybrid players that can run and be aggressive. And when you have that, you know what you can be? Exactly what Venables wants to be, which is very aggressive and multiple in your structures. So they give the opposition all sorts of fits all the time because they play so many different structures up front. 3 down defensive linemen, 4 down defensive linemen. They'll get into bear. Bear defense means that you cover up every single lineman with somebody up front. So you've got a 5-man front. All of that presents a lot of problems for identification and calls and how you're going to double team, whether you can double team. So offensive linemen have to work really hard when they're playing a Venables defense. Okay. All that to say, this defense is a lot better than I anticipated, and in large part because they can be aggressive. And we saw the aggressiveness play out. Again, 5 sacks, 10 tackles for loss. Texas only had 1 sack and 5 TFLs on the other side. Then they also get the 3 takeaways, which was basically the game. And think about how important those takeaways were in the spots that they got them. They created a short field for their offense, and in a red zone possession for the Texas offense, they get a turnover. So these are wildly successful plays for them, and in particular, preventing points and creating points on the other side. And then the most important possession for them defensively was the goal line stand. And getting off the field on that series was really the game. When you boil it all down, the Oklahoma defense, which didn't do anything last year and was part of the problem, or maybe even more than part of the problem, when you're looking at their record a year ago, the fact that they weren't, an above 500 team, that it was their worst record since the John Blake era. Why? Because of the defense. And what happened Saturday? That defense showed up. There's still room for growth, not only this year, but in the future. Like I was saying, they can get better up front. They can get longer on the outside. But they were able to be aggressive and attack because they have the competitive depth that I was talking about. Again, 6 transfers on that defensive line. That was an important part of their win on Saturday. So good on them. And then Dillon Gabriel, he played an insane game. He was outstanding. And in those games, a lot of times it comes down to the quarterback play. He made the plays that Ewers, frankly, didn't. And Ewers, even though he played well, more on that in a moment, and by the way, really well, he made a couple of giant mistakes and turned the ball over. Gabriel didn't. So he wins the game. And in that setting, trust me when I tell you, like, mistakes are magnified and great plays are also magnified. And Dillon Gabriel, that win is going to live on for a long time with him. His ability to be elusive, I thought was tremendous. And then moving forward, what does this all mean for Oklahoma? This is what it means for Oklahoma, that the CFP is dead in their sights. Not only do they clearly control their own destiny, I would argue that they've got a little bit of room. I think that they bought themselves some cushion in this season. There's a scenario, you can paint a picture where they show up flat one week, and I'm not saying that they will. I'm just saying, like, something happens. Maybe it's a fluke injury, fluke road game. You know how things are. These are still college kids. Can't play their best every single week. You're not going to get that level of performance from Dillon Gabriel every single week. I mean, I guess you could, and then you'd win the Heisman Trophy. But you get what I'm saying. Like, there's going to be ebbs and flows, and we understand that. They bought themselves some cushion because let's say they have a stinker in Big 12 play, which we've seen from a lot of teams. They could still go to Dallas. They could still probably rematch with this Texas team. And if they win, boom, they're in the playoff. So you can paint that scenario where they buy themselves a little wiggle room. Not that they're going to need it because their schedule doesn't look all that tough. Not at all. UCF at Oklahoma State, which is right now just a shell of their former self. looking at the schedule over here. BYU at Kansas becomes kind of their toughest regular season game. West Virginia at home, TCU at home. Maybe BYU on the road is a stumbling block. Maybe it's Bedlam on the. I'm not sure. Those are your 3 road games: BYU, Oklahoma State, and Kansas. I think we might have a chance at that Kansas game. That would be fun. I would love to call another OU game this year. So they bought themselves some cushion. Good on you, OU. I doubted them last week. I was very high, and it wasn't so much that I doubted OU as much as I was just very high on Texas and what I had seen from Texas. And by the way, rightly so, after what they did against Alabama and the way that they had played against both Baylor and Kansas. And I believed that they would play really well, and they did in a large regard. But let's move over to that Texas team. What is the fallout for Texas? Because I think a lot of people are going to sit there and they're going to immediately think to themselves like, well, here we go again with Texas. I don't view it that way. I just don't. I still feel like this Texas team is different than the previous seasons. They played a Red River game really tightly and made a few too many mistakes. This is not indicative of a team that I feel like is going to continue to stub their toe. Mainly because like you look at what happened and it's like they made huge mistakes. And I touched on them a little bit earlier. The first interception of the day from Ewers led to the short field. So that's a Sooner touchdown, points on the board. The second interception came when they were in the red zone. That takes points off the board. So now all of a sudden you're creating a margin and you're creating a difficult path for the rest of the game. You generally don't win the game if just those 2 things happen. Just those 2 things happen. You throw a pick that leads to points and throw a pick that takes points off the board. You generally don't win a big game if just those 2 things cap. They fumbled. That came on a 3rd down with Texas at midfield in the 3rd quarter. And then they had that goal line opportunity in which they failed, and credit Oklahoma for the goal line stand. That's points off the board. You don't win the game in that scenario. And yet there they were with a 3-point lead with 1:17 left. So in a lot of ways, you could think to yourself like, boy, that went about as poorly as you could have hoped if you're a Texas fan, and you still were in a position to win and didn't down the stretch. I don't think this is indicative of some sort of slide. I do not think this is indicative of, well, Texas is not back overall. This is still a really good football team. I look at their schedule and I still think that they've got everything ahead of them. And here's why. While OU still has room now, they've got cushion and they've bought themselves that cushion. Texas doesn't. They have no margin for error, but there is no earthly possibility. I'm just setting this, and maybe this will come back to bite me, but I just don't think it will. There's no way that Texas runs the table, gets into the Big 12 championship game, highly likely against Oklahoma. Then they've got 60 minutes against Oklahoma to avenge their 1 loss of the year. If they do it, they not only beat the team they lost to, they still have the Alabama win. And with Alabama playing a lot better, they would be a champ with 1 loss, a win over the team that they lost to in Oklahoma, and a win over Alabama. There's no scenario where I see them missing the playoff if those things happen. So while it's disappointing for Texas, I do not believe it's indicative of some sort of collapse. I do not believe it's indicative that their season is now no longer important. I just don't think that they have any margin. They've put themselves into a corner. They've backed themselves into that position, and now they've got to go play really well. A lot of people will be concerned with the Ewers interceptions, and I understand that. And yes, you can't turn the ball over. I get it. He also just had 6 incompletions. So it's not like he played poorly. It's not like he played a 50% completion percentage game and didn't look good and threw 3 picks, and then they lose by 3. And it's like, geez, is he going to fold in big moments? I don't think he's going to fold in big moments. Like in a lot of regards, Texas outplayed OU, and those mistakes led to the loss. I think that they can learn from that. I think that they can get better from that. This is a team that I still believe in. They still gained a lot of yards. They still had a 3-point lead with 1:17 left. And I think everything's ahead of them in this season. So the fallout from Red River was that OU is in the catbird seat. They've got their sights set on the CFP, and Texas has themselves now backed into a corner. That's really the bottom line when you're looking at what happened on Saturday in that old Cotton Bowl. So good on Oklahoma. That was a heck of a win. And by the way, I do think it was one of the two best wins of the entire season so far.